Welcome to Season 4 of the Europol Podcast, the official podcast of the EU Agency for Law Enforcement Cooperation. This season, we look at the emerging threats and key developments in the field of cybercrime. In this episode, we tackle the extra questions we received during our previous episode on how CSAM offenders are adapting to new technology. For this, I speak with Danny van Althuis, head of team at Europol, where we discuss the importance of law enforcement and cooperation in the fight against CSAM, CSAM detection and generation, and the different types of offender behaviors. Our conversation was recorded during a Europol live expert session. Because the live Q&A already took place, it is no longer possible to ask questions. Take a listen. Welcome back, everyone. Last time we sat down with Danny van Althuis here for a live session on how offenders who produce and distribute child sexual abuse material are adapting their tactics as new technology emerges, from AI-generated content to encrypted platforms and shifting online spaces. Welcome back, Danny. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm very good. Thank you for the invitation again.
Yes, of course. So the conversation we had around CSAM offenders last time clearly struck a nerve. So now we're back for this extra episode. And we're going to dedicate it entirely to working through as many of those questions as we can. So what do you say we get started?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Okay. So let's start with some questions we got on law enforcement and cooperation. So the first one, how does international law enforcement cooperation work daily versus task forces? What would make law enforcement agencies more successful in combating CSAM?
Yeah. So the international cooperation within Europol is not solely this high-profile task forces that is advertised a lot. It happens every day. So Europol is not doing the investigations itself. We are in the middle of international investigations constantly. So on a daily basis, we handle 4, 5 to 10 different investigations, several thousand on annual base. And of course, these international task forces, they are the most huge media impacted. And that's what we learn about the most in the media. But the international cooperation happens from day to day. So every day we are in between different countries, member states and third-party countries, who have investigations together, always between 10 and let's say 30, 35 different countries working on one case. And we receive the information, we process the information, analyze it, and we try to give the countries that participate in this investigation additional information, additional intelligence to proceed with that investigations. And we do that to several different possibilities. The most used is our secure intelligence exchange network. That is like the internal network between law enforcement international, where we can send and receive information and make sure that something is always traceable evidence-wise. Then we have our own web servers, our own private servers where we can communicate online. And if it is necessary, we can also gather here at Europol or in any country if it's possible or necessary, but mostly here in Europol, where we invite those member states and the investigators and their coordinators to interact in person. And that can lead up from an online meeting to a full week or 2-week data sprint or task force.
Okay. And speaking of how we operate in cross-border cases, how is jurisdiction handled in cross-border CSAM cases?
Yeah. So every country has its own jurisdiction. Every country who gets information in their investigation, they decide what information they wish to share with others. They decide what information they want to share, even within a group of countries, with what countries. And it's very important to realize that the evidence is always owned by the country. So the ownership does never transfer to Europol. So we have the information. We can work with the information, we can do analysis on it, we can enrich the information. But if we decide that it would be interesting or necessary to share information with another country than the contributing country, we will always respect the ownership and always will respect the choice that the owner of the data makes to what countries it might be disseminated and to what country in certain conditions it cannot be disseminated. You can imagine if an ongoing investigation needs to be as secret as possible, then the amount of countries that we can share information with is less than when the information is not possibly damaging ongoing investigations in countries. So that might differ over time, and we always make sure that we obey the ownership of the data.
Okay. And we have one last one on law enforcement cooperation. Are there enough specialists to keep pace with CSAM volume?
No, the answer is no for that. If you would take the enormous amount of investigative data that we have to go over, and I'm not only talking about the material, so the media files itself, I'm also talking about the huge amount of other seized data at computers and data carriers seized internationally, of course, because those contributions all come to Europol. We are never with enough manpower to do that. So we have to triage very carefully. We have to be very thorough in how we use technology to assist us with that. So you can imagine that we use software to cluster information to make sure that information is presented to the human so that the human can make a decision on something that is clustered by technology. So we do not automate things on our side because we think that it is the only right way that a human investigator with experience has the say in the end, what happens with the information. But yes, of course, we try to utilize technology to the max to make sure that the information that is presented to the specialist, to the investigator, is as tailored as possible so that decisions can be made quicker.
So let's move on to, we have quite a few questions on CSAM detection and generation. So the first one is, are abusers creating CSAM material from scratch, or are they using hosted platforms?
Yeah, both. So the CSAM system or the ecosystem is very diverse and it's evolving very, very fast. And so both of the things that you mentioned in your question is happening. So we see that known material is altered with artificial intelligence. We see non-CSAM material being sexualized with artificial intelligence, so it is created into child sexual abuse material. And we see CSAM being generated out of nothing. But it's good to mention that creating an image, whatever image that might be on a computer, needs a model, and the model needs to be trained on what it needs to create. So if you would talk like a media file, create it, CSAM media file, create it. It is not the right way to say that it is a non-victimless situation, because every creation of every media file happens by a model, and the model is trained in the past. And we know that CSAM models are trained on actual child sexual abuse material or other pornographic material because it's always sexualized. So there's always a real victim in the beginning to start with.
So let's go with the next question. What's the volume of fully or partially synthetic AI CSAM material?
It is big. We do not know exactly how big it is because the quality is so good at the moment that it's difficult to distinguish if something is fully AI generated or AI altered or non-AI material. And that is something that we saw evolve in the last 2.5 years. The quality over the last 2 years went from easily detectable by a professional, or even without being a professional, to being detectable by a professional, or to being non-detectable by a professional. So that means that the The issue on prioritization, which we mentioned earlier, is getting more and more interesting or severe or more important, because you can imagine that we always try to seek those children who are in imminent threat, in imminent danger, and needs to be identified to be safeguarded. We have to make sure that we are not trying to identify a victim which is fully AI generated, because within the prioritization we always try to safeguard victims as soon as possible. So the amount of material is growing. We have millions, tens of millions of media files, and I wish I could give you a percentage of what that was AI generated or AI altered. At this moment, we are working as hard as possible to have good classification tools, AI classification tools, to at least help us identify the amount of AI generated material, because we can exclude that and give it a different place in priority in relation to real victims being in harm at this moment.
Let's go with the next question. What's fueling the growth of CSAM? Is it things like porn addiction or demand for extreme content or something else?
Well, you both said it right. Yes, porn addiction and the demand for more and more extreme content. And normalization of this content, and therefore also the extreme content, is one of the things that we see. So we see deepfake, we see deepfake pornography, we see deepfake child sexual abuse material, we see a lot of AI generated material or altered material where the imagination has no limit to see that. We see over the past years that the severity is increasing. So we see that the threshold of being gratified is moving up. And that means that if somebody would go to hands-on abuse, then the abuse is getting more and more severe. Because AI or AI altering, it lowers the barrier. Offenders can do whatever they want, whatever they have in their mind, they can start creating that. And there are a lot of discussion if fully AI generated material is preventive or not. But we see that the severity is increasing. So the prevention part is not proven in the numbers or in the severity that we see in the day-to-day seizures.
How has the derogation of voluntary detection measures impacted investigations?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to say that the voluntary detection is being reinstalled, and luckily it is reinstalled, because you can imagine that detection by the online service providers or the platforms that are giving our children the social media possibilities, it is very, very important. So we see every year between 20 and 27 million referrals coming to the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children. That is all on voluntary detection base in the US. And that information is disseminated all over the world. So to give you an example, Europol is responsible for more than 1.1 million of those referrals, referring to 24 countries within the European Union. And those are very important, because we see that and that is important because we see that a lot of those countries who receive the information wish to prioritize that information to start acting on it, because it gives you an identity, it gives you a location, it gives you a suspicion, and that means that they can act on it. And we know for a fact that a percentage, and it's always difficult to talk about percentage, but even if it would be 1% safeguarding of children in the amount of more than 25 million referrals, that number makes it already worth having this detection possibilities. So we, as Europol, are happy that the temporary derogation is reinstalled and that we have the possibility to receive that detected information from the US.
Okay. Do prevention measures have an effect?
Absolutely. It is very important to make sure targeted intervention and prevention is in place. It is very important to educate children or young adults what to do and what not to do online, what certain behavior can evolve in, and they need to try to identify, or they need to learn how to identify those perpetrators, trying to lure them in their web and then change it into an abusive situation. We know now, for instance, that the Say No campaign, which you can visit on the Europol website, is something that you can look after, and you can see what kind of help there is. We have initiatives within Europol, for instance, Help for You, where if you are a victim of a child sexual abuse or child sexual exploitation, you can go to that website, you can seek help within the European Union, tailored to the country where you're in the language where you are in. So it's important to educate them. And there is also great external initiatives, named Hack Shield, for instance. Hack Shield is an educational program rolled out over almost 200,000 children a year, and they get educated in online crime in general, to be honest, but child sexual exploitation and abuse situations is a part of that. And that is every few months it is updated and a new topic is educated to the children. And that awareness, that prevention, make them aware. It make them recognize easier when they started to lure into a situation. And we can learn from them as well, because we know where we have to go to in the future. And also for offenders to seek therapy. I think it's important also to mention that offenders might identify with themselves that they have a problem. I think help links or Stop It Now, for instance, those are the parts where offenders can go to and seek professional help for the sexual interests that they have.
So let's move on to some more specific questions on the behavior of offenders.
Yeah.
The first one, how has the profile of CSAM producers changed due to AI?
Yeah, so first, the fulfillment for somebody who collects child sexual abuse material is partially because they are sexually attracted. They want to collect as much as possible, and they have their own desires in what kind of material they want. So you see that people have certain interests. Could be male, could be female, different age possibilities. We see that offenders are very attracted to a certain group of material, and they start collecting that. If you would transfer that to the AI part, where there is no boundary on what imagination can be in what you can depict in that media file, in that image or in that video file, I think that's directly the answer. So the motivation is collecting and creating what they are really interested in. At the same time, a lot of them realize that what they're doing is illegal. So they come together in forums where they sit together, of course, not directly sitting, but where they come together and where they share material, where they even sell material if there is a high wish for it, but more important, where they educate themselves. And that education is very, very broad. It's education how to stay safe online. It's educating how to stay out of the hands of law enforcement, because they know that we are looking for them. It is education on how to make sure that your computer is configured in a way that anonymization is as high as possible. And what we also see training on how to actually abuse real children, how to give them drugs so that they do not remember what happened, how to make sure that you are in the possibility to attract children in real life. And on the AI part, we see also fully forums. We have an example where we have over 165,000 users on the forum dedicated how to train models to create AI-generated child sexual abuse material. And that goes from how to configure your computer, which software to use, where the best models are to be received online, how the best low-rank adaptation or fine-tuning models can be found, and even how to train those models to get it more productive in the future.
Earlier, you mentioned Hack Shield. It's in essence a video game to teach children about this. We also have cyber defenders at Europol to kind of teach children the warning signs or the red
Absolutely.
flags about this. So, speaking of that, what are the trends that are being seen in online games related to CSAM?
Yeah. So first, children or people play games online, and I think the game that we as Europol co-created, it gives children the possibility in an environment that they like to be in within the game to get educated on the risks that are out there and that they can then hopefully identify in an early stage. And Hack Shield is very, very comparable. It is only in a classroom experience. So there's a educational program and a student program, and it is done online. But I think education within games is the way how to educate children, because that is where they are. It is also where the perpetrators are, to identify them. And we see in the gaming industry from the old days, 2012, 2011, 2013, that we have online environments where perpetrators would sit with a text document on their computer and they can copy paste information into a chat. And then depending on what kind of reaction the child would give, then they can copy paste new information, try to get them so far to go to a private environment. With the new technology, the copy pasting is not necessary anymore. So where in the past a perpetrator had the possibility to maybe chat with 10 or 15 children at the same time, because it was a lot of copy pasting and reading, a large language model or a bot can do that for him. And only if a threshold predetermined by a perpetrator is met, then that possible victim is handed over digitally to the perpetrator itself. And we see also in online that there are possibilities to even talk to the game. The game's language model interprets it, knows that it is a CSAM environment where they want to have this game, and it also answers in that way. So in that matter, we see a more and more digitally evolving gaming industry, but that also is directly reflected on abuse situation, whether that is phishing, making somebody a victim of a banking crime, CEO fraud. Everything is comparable, but especially also in my crime area where I work on, we see that children get victims.
Okay, let's go to the next question. What is it that motivates buyers of CSAM material?
Yeah, so it is collection. It is making sure that the sexual gratification threshold is being met, and then we are talking into the AI because the severity is there apart. So first, it is collection, and a lot of collections are without that people have to pay for it. They just can find it. They know how to search for it online, whether it's on darknet forums or in other enclosed end-to-end encrypted environments. They just know where to go to, they download it and they collect it and they share it. Then there is a possibility to buy something which is very specific and somebody has it for sale, and you see those packages being sold as well and also bought, of course. And then we see the AI part where the already done material is up for sale online, but also models, low rank adaptation, fine-tuning models to make sure that you can buy something after which you can start creating the material yourself.
Is CSAM present on the clear web, and do large online platforms enhance offender interactions?
Yeah. So CSAM is present on the internet, whether it's the clear web or the dark web. It is present on the internet. And very large online platforms, they offer the location to do that. And those large platforms, they are abused in a sense as well. So that a perpetrator uses or misuses that platform to do criminal acts and to share information, to share child sexual abuse material, to talk about that material. Therefore, the more important that the temporary derogation is back into place, because we see that as VLOPs often have detection possibilities. And if they detect it, they will make sure that law enforcement get that information. So the fact that they are abused by abusers, by criminals, and the possibility that they have a voluntary detection gives possibility for law enforcement to start acting on that behavior and also to make sure that victims are safeguarded in the end.
So let's go with one more question on offenders' behaviors. Are offenders generating AI CSAM without outside interaction?
So I think it's fair to say that the majority of the online child sexual abuse material by AI created is done not online, in air-gapped models or in standalone situation. Doing it online has a huge risk. First of all, the open source models or the open online models do not facilitate criminal behavior in general very, very easily. There's also the detection problem. We know that these online platforms will, if they detect that you use it for criminal behavior, they will involve law enforcement and they will disseminate that information to them. But it's nowadays so easy if you have a powerful computer, and 9 out of 10 computers now being sold are very powerful. Deploying a AI model on it is 15 minutes work. If you go to the dark web forums that we discussed earlier in this conversation, you can find especially where to go to, what to download, how to install it, step-by-step introduction, step-by-step educated. So I think if you would read the forum, deploy the model within an hour, hour and a half, you are trained, downloaded, and you are ready to start creating your own material. And of course, you have to learn. It is learning by doing. It is not as easy as it looks, but everything started not as easy. Even the Tor browser 16 years ago was not a executable file installed. It is nowadays. So these models are getting easier and easier to install in air-gapped or standalone situations.
So Europol recently published a press release on Operation Torch, where there were 28 arrests, 3 children were safeguarded, and 7 countries involved were supported by Europol. Can you tell us a bit more about Operation Torch?
Yes. So Operation Torch is an example of a huge international coordinated and collaborated investigation led and initiated by the Norwegians in this situation. And it is one of the examples where we're talking about that it is not only about task forces, it is about international cooperation as a whole. So Torch itself was not a task force. It was an investigation where the Norwegians identified more countries involved in the crime that they were investigated, and they sought help from those countries. We were in the middle for the coordination and dissemination information, analysis of all the information, and making sure that all the country packages were sent out to those countries. And we also aligned the arrests, aligned the seizures in that matter of fact. So Torch, in the end, is one of the many investigations that we do. But it was quite successful because we seized over 640 different digital items. We had a huge success in the amount of arrests, as you already mentioned. And again, a great example of international collaboration where we know that this online crime, which has no borders, can be investigated thoroughly, and an action can be executed very thoroughly, because also law enforcement, with the help of Europol, can collaborate without borders.
how would one go about entering a career in this field?
Yeah, so if you talk about law enforcement in general, it depends on what country you are in. So there's two reasons. You have to really look into the country where you are living in if you are watching this or listening to this podcast. There is a possibility to go into law enforcement directly out of university, for instance. So out of university, you can go to law enforcement into a investigative role. That depends on the country. The majority of the countries wants to have the more old-fashioned or the more historical way. You go to the police academy, you become a police officer. After a couple of years, you have the opportunity to get to be an investigator or a detective in some countries, and then you start growing. And then, of course, your interest needs to be there. You need to be a little bit tech savvy. You need at least to be very interested in technical development. You need to be interested in being victim-centric. So crimes against children investigators are a different breed than other investigators who do drug crimes, for instance. That is about the criminal. We are very victim focused. So in the end, if a case would not be prosecutable good enough, but we can identify and safeguard the victim, we will take that risk not to have enough evidence for a successful prosecution. So that's a way of thinking. You have to be stable enough or mentally capable enough to do this work, because it is intense work. It is heavy sometimes. You have to be honest to each other and honest to yourself. You know, what is the moment that you need to discuss some things that are bothering you in the work, because it will affect you one way or the other in a certain amount of time. And you need to be open and honest to yourself and to your colleagues to make sure that you also can proceed with your work. So I think that in general, coming to Europol, that is a little different. Then you have to be working for a competent authority or a national authority in a country that is law enforcement if you want to be in operations. You have to be experienced. There is a very high threshold to come into Europol because we need a lot of capabilities from the staff members, but there's also very little space for a lot of people who wants to work here. So the threshold is quite high. So I would say try to start working in law enforcement and try to find your way into crimes against children units. If you do not want to do that, you can also work for in-hope network, for instance. So it's not really necessary to work in law enforcement to make your way into the crimes against children ecosystem or in our network, because we do work a lot with public-private partners, with NGOs, with the in-hope network where the hotlines are connected, for instance. So there are more possibilities, but law enforcement specific, you have to have a career in police, whether it is from police academy up or horizontal from university. That depends on the country where you're in.
Thanks, Danny. To close the episode, I wanted to broaden the scope a little more and ask, how can the public help respond to CSAM?
Yeah, so the most important part is, if you get child sexual abuse material, do not disseminate it further. You will be the one where it stops, because we know that social media platforms, the media is shared, it is reshared on all the popular social media platforms. Make sure that you are the one where the dissemination stops. So don't disseminate it further. Make contact with local law enforcement, whether that's a hotline, whether that's law enforcement. Go to a website like NECMEC and report the information so that we can give the information. You can give the evidence to that part. And I think it's also good to have, especially if you are parents, to have an honest talk with your children, to say, okay, if you're going outside, we teach children how to cross the street. We teach children how to come home and at different times, for instance. We also, and if they come home and we are in dinner, we are talking, hey, how was football today? How was school? Yeah? Talk with your children. It is not strange to say that nowadays, where a lot of the time of their children is spent online, maybe to ask them, how was your gaming? Because you hear your children talk during a game. How was your gaming experience? And make sure that you know what they're doing, and that they always feel safe to come to you if something is bothering them. Because if they are groomed online, it will bother them. So they need somebody to go to that they can trust, and that they are also sure that whatever they would tell you, that they will not be in problems or not be in trouble, that you will give them that support. So I think those are the most important parts to say. And again, if you come across it, report it, because every report that you give has an actual victim. So it gives us the possibility to identify that victim and put it into a safe situation. If you have children yourself, make sure that your children are open as possible as children will be to parents, to you. And if you are in a situation when somebody is extorting you online, the extortion will not stop if you comply with the thing that is asked. There's always an additional question. So if there is a situation where you find yourself being pressured by somebody or by more people, always realize that reaching out to family, to law enforcement, to somebody that you trust is always the best solution now, because giving in to somebody who is extorting you will always lead to more extortion. There is no case in my memory where somebody who was extorted ended that extortion by giving in to the demands.
Thank you for that, Danny. I think those great last thoughts to end the episode with. If you would like to know more about the key cyber threats affecting the EU, including child sexual abuse material, ransomware, and online fraud schemes, you can listen to all the episodes of this series on whichever platform you are using to listen. And if you enjoyed the show, maybe consider sharing the podcast on your social media. If you want to hear more about our work making Europe safer, you can always check out our website, europol.europa.eu, or the show notes for more resources. Thank you very much for listening. We will see you soon.